Joining us now, Congressman, 3rd District in Virginia, a little more competitive than it was in the past for Congressman Bobby Scott. But I know Bobby Scott, he's excited it's redistricted because he loves to debate, he loves to engage, and it's going to be a fun campaign. His Republican opponent, Marty Williams, so it ought to be a fun campaign. Congressman Scott, great to have you with us, sir.
John, good to talk to you. I haven't talked to you in a long time. Good luck in your campaign.
Thank you.
One thing, I do not represent the new district yet. Technically, I'm to represent the old district until the end of the year. I will be running in the new district this year, but I will be representing the old district.
All right, thanks for that.
And that's important because I have taxpayer money that pays for offices and things like that. The Richmond office will stay open until the end of the year because I'm still representing the Richmond area, but I'm campaigning in the new district, which does not include the Richmond area.
All right. Well, I know you're going to be looking forward to the campaign, and you never want to shy away from a debate and engaging on the issue, so we're looking forward to that. Congressman, I want to get right to the big issue, and I appreciate you joining me. If there's one thing I can always count on from Bobby Scott, it is complete candor. So thanks for being with us. You were right. You don't mince words. You were not happy with the way things went down with the markup of the National Defense Authorization Act. You voted no. Your statement was pretty direct and clear. Can you share with our audience two things? Why you voted no on it, and then secondly, your level of outrage over what some of your colleagues felt went down yesterday on one of the provisions for LGTB for contractors after the clock ran out.
Okay, well, actually, there were two different bills. The defense bill was 2 days ago, and the military construction VA bill was yesterday.
Right.
And that's when all the confusion started on the Milcon bill. But the national defense bill a couple of years ago was actually on shipbuilding. It did a lot of great things. There was a modest increase for salaries for our troops, and that was the good part of the bill. And you don't expect it to be perfect, and it had some problems, and it just got to the point where the problems just overcame the good parts. We'll have another opportunity to revisit it. But it had some budget gimmicks in there that were where some of the money, some of the accounts will run dry 6 months into the fiscal year. There was what's called overseas contingent fund, but it's basically a budget gimmick they pulled. And our troops we're going to need a supplemental bill based on all the projections in just 6 months. The Guantanamo Bay issue, where we just have a handful of prisoners and we're spending millions of dollars every year on just a handful of prisoners. I mean, there's got to be a better way than that. But there are two areas that I've been working on as ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee. One is executive orders on fair pay and safe workplace, which allows consideration in when you give out contracts to firms that have been found consistently and frequently guilty of stealing people's wages, safety violation, and other workplace violations. You ought to be able to consider that before you fund them again. You ought to be able to consider maybe going with somebody else that doesn't have all those problems. That executive order was essentially overridden by the legislation, and another provision that provides discrimination in employment by many federal contractors. That provision was in there that allowed discrimination. In the criminal justice area, they actually had a mandatory minimum. We've been fighting mandatory minimum sentencing. One of the major drivers for over-incarceration, we lock up a higher portion of our population than any country on earth, and one of the, by far, and one of the drivers is these irrational mandatory minimums which require a judge, regardless of the circumstances, to impose a mandatory minimum sentence, no discretion, even though it may not fit in certain circumstances. Now, usually the mandatory minimum is set at what you would expect a judge to do in most cases, but a lot of cases it just doesn't fit, and you end up people getting totally bizarre and irrational sentences, violating common sense. Some people, first offenders, end up getting 5, 10, 15. Some first offenders are getting 50 years in prison, and the judge has no authority to consider any of the mitigating factors.
Makes no sense.
We have too many mandatory minimums in the code, and you can't get rid of the ones you got until you stop passing new ones.
Right.
And here's another new mandatory minimum in the defense bill.
Crazy.
And so all of those reasons, I decided to vote no. We'll have another opportunity to visit the defense bill. Yesterday was a Milcon bill where amendment was passing to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, and if contractors are guilty of that kind of discrimination, their ability to get contracts could be considered. That passed. Wait a minute. It started to pass. And when the time ran out, it was well ahead. And they kept it open, and they changed the vote, and they kept it open, and they changed the vote, and they kept it open, and they kept it open until they had twisted arms and gotten people to change their votes, lost by when it was down one, all of a sudden the time was really out, and they dropped the gavel. It was just shameful, particularly on an issue involving civil rights, that they would squeeze people and make them change their votes. And we have the list of those who changed their votes, and then that'll become public. But the last time, a couple of years ago, in the Medicaid and the Medicare prescriptive drug bill, they kept a vote open for 3 hours until they could twist enough arms to finally win. And after that, it was the rule. The custom was supposed to be that you could not keep a vote open for the sole purpose of changing people's votes, and that principle was clearly violated yesterday, and particularly egregious on a civil rights issue. And that caused a lot of consternation.
Well, Congressman, look, that Paul Ryan promised a return to regular order. This violates regular order. And just looking at, so our audience knows what happened, for this amendment, which was put forth by Representative of New York, Sean Patrick Maloney, basically saying in order to get a federal contract out of the defense thing, there's this language in here that prohibits discrimination against anybody in the LGBT community, transgenders, etc. And when time ran out, the amendment had carried because there were only 206 Republicans voting no. They needed 213 to defeat it, and time had run out, right? Everybody voted, time was out, so they held the clock open, and then Majority Leader from California, Kevin McCarthy, apparently went on the floor to his side of the aisle, found 7 people to twist, got them to change their vote. And normally, so our audience understands, when you change your vote, that's fine because, you can hit the wrong button or change your mind. You have to physically go to the well, go to the person with the gavel, announce your name and say you want to change your vote. Well, they didn't do that either. They just let him.
We were under a process at that point. We had reduced the time. That's the process in 15-minute votes, which is a standard time for voting. When you have a long series, frequently the time between votes is reduced not to 15 minutes but to 5 minutes, and sometimes, if it's an extremely long list, you can go to 2 minutes. And we were in the 2-minute procedure, where you have 2 minutes to vote. In a 2-minute vote, you do not have to go down to the well to change your vote at the last minute. That you can, but so long as the vote is held open, you can change your vote without going to the well. So nothing mechanically unusual was happening. But in a 2-minute vote, it's supposed to be a 2-minute vote. And the reason you have it, and it was held open, it seemed like at least 15 to 20 minutes. I don't know exactly. I'm sure somebody has a clock on it. But for a 2-minute vote, the purpose is to get through the list quickly. A 2-minute vote time was up, and they just kept it open. And open, and open, and open, and after about 5, it seemed like about 5 or 10 minutes, maybe more, they got one person to change and kept it open a little more, and then somebody else came down and then after a little while longer, I mean, it was if the majority leader was going around threatening. I don't know how you get somebody to change a vote that late. What do you tell somebody? They've already voted. They know how they want to vote. And if you look at the list, the vote that they had cast was consistent with the votes they usually cast. And I don't know what they were told, but it was certainly a regrettable process, and it caused a lot of consternation on the floor. But I just want to point out those are two different bills: the National Defense Authorization,
right,
and the Milcon bill were 2 different days.
Right, and I just wanted to combine everything because we're in this one segment, so I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, well, that's fine. But you'd mentioned in the previous session talking about the budget. One of the problems we've got in the budget is people fail to recognize, and we've said this before, fail to recognize arithmetic. If you want to balance the budget, you got to either raise taxes or cut spending. And there are no proposals to cut spending enough to get the budget anywhere close to balance. I mean, one of the Tea Party budget that claims to be in balance assumes, without raising taxes, assumes that you would eliminate about 90% of discretionary spending. I mean, 90% of the aid for education, no roads, no prisons. What that's not going to happen, and you know that. And so having a budget that's so unrealistic is the only way you can make the numbers work without raising taxes. And I know the one budget a couple of years ago that the Republicans put forth had $4 trillion in tax cuts, and then a little asterisk said revenue neutral. Revenue neutral means you're going to raise $4 trillion in taxes. Well, that's not going to happen. So, I mean, we haven't had realistic budgets, and when you fail to fund the actual spending that you voted for, you're going to end up with a deficit. Well, and everybody knows it. But it's kind of tough because if you're going to conform to arithmetic, you got to come up with the money, and the only way to do that is to raise taxes.
It's going to be really interesting.
Or come up with an alternative that realistically cuts spending, one or the other.
Right.
But people don't want to go there.
Or both.
And so they just, or both, or
right.
A combination.
Right.
But people don't want to go there because those are tough votes.
Well, it's going to be very interesting if Donald Trump becomes president. He's not a politician. He's not part of this. He's been balancing budgets in his $10 billion business forever. It's going to be very interesting to see when he gets a spreadsheet out, how he's going to be able to figure this out. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the Oval Office when he's working on it, because I do think, Congressman Scott, he is going to win. And I predicted that, as you know, for some time. I've got a text from...
Well, you predicted a long time that he was going to get the nomination, and nobody believed you.
I know they all thought I was crazy, and they made fun of me. And now look at it today. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to beat.
And you came to my annual cookout with a "Make America Great" baseball cap on.
I know. And even with that, you took a picture of me and you fed me.
That was last September.
It was last September. I know.
You had it figured out a long time ago. But I think this is the end of his run. I think he's going to. He's beaten about everybody he can beat, and we'll see what happens in November.
I think he's going to win. But I've got to read you this text here from one of your constituents, Brenda. We were commenting earlier on Senator Tim Kaine urging the president to allow another 10,000 Syrian refugees into the United States. They cost $65,000 each. We have 20,000 people right now sleeping in a drain pipe in Los Angeles. And her question is, Congressman Scott, how does putting refugees in my 3rd district, what does that do to help me? What's your answer to that?
Well, you have an international crisis, and everyone, I think it's appropriate that the United States do its share in addressing an international crisis. I mean, if we don't do our share, then somebody else is going to be relegated to dealing with it, and at some point, I think we need to work with the international community to try to solve the crisis. It's not easy, and if you look at 10,000, that would be about, just in Hampton Roads, that'd be about 30 or 40 people in Hampton Roads. I think we could deal with that as part of an international crisis. When everybody else, Germany is taking hundreds of thousands. We need to do our share. We're part of the international community.
So what do you tell the 20,000 people tonight that are sleeping under bridges and in drain pipes in the city of Los Angeles? What do you tell them?
You tell them that we should have had better housing initiatives, that we could afford it. But if you look at the HUD budget, it's been cut. At the same time, we're cutting taxes. This is part of the overall budget. We do not have nearly enough money in on the housing, low-income housing. A lot of people, and that's not Los Angeles. You got cities where people, if you're under the median wage, which is half the people, it's hard to afford housing. You can't afford an apartment. Washington D.C., we see it all the time. That people are sitting up in Washington D.C. and can't afford decent housing.
Well, that's an issue, but that's why
it's a problem. It's a problem unrelated. It's not related to the 20 or 30 people Hampton Roads might have to absorb if 10,000 more people actually came in. There's a lot of stuff that we are not doing. Housing being one. If you look at the markup we had this week on child nutrition, some people want to save money by cutting the nutrition standards for school lunches and kicking kids off the program. I'd like to see a program where everybody gets lunch, school lunch, so that you don't have to go through the eligibility, and you don't have to. Everybody can get served. It's been shown that the nutritious lunch is extremely valuable in long-term health, certainly for short-term education. There are a lot of things that we're not doing, and if you've got people, 20,000 homeless, Los Angeles isn't the only place where the homeless problems. We've got problems right here in Hampton Roads.
No, it's all over. Hey, Congressman, I'm out of time. We are out of time. I really want to thank you for coming on. We got to get you back on now on a regular basis, being that you're going to be involved in a campaign for the newly created 3rd District. You do have a Republican opponent, Marty Williams. I know you'll enjoy the debate with that, and I want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott, as always, for being with us today and for his unabashed candor that you can always expect from him. Congressman, it's always an honor to have you on, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.